I can narrate to you so many different stories about Palestine, not just from today. I've never wept so much in my life. And I don't know these children. I don't know that land. What are these people going through? 5,000 innocent children. Any human being who sees a child suffering, it will break their heart. And you remain patient in his affliction, calamity placed upon him, alayhi salam. And lost all of his wealth and his property and his children and everything. So a few years, if Allah tests me, what difference does it make? It's not always true that a person has to be sinful to go through trials and tribulations. That the more that you burn gold, the more purified it becomes. After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sending immense greetings and salutations upon the final Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, we spoke about the various trials and tribulations and temptations that every single human being will face inside their lives. Obviously, the degree or the variance of trials and tribulations and temptations will differ for every single individual. But every single individual has to face their fair share of trials and tribulations and temptations upon this dunya. And that's the verse that we discussed inside Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th chapter of the Quran, these 110 verses, that a few broad discussions of fitan or trials and tribulations are mentioned inside this surah. In specific, we find 4 tribulations are mentioned inside this surah and the challenges that these people they had to face, and specifically Ashabul Kahf, the companions of the cave, who made this dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rabbana atina min ladunka rahmah wa hayyi' lana min amrina rashada. They made this dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that grant us mercy from yourself and give us the ability of guidance to steer us in this calamity or this tribulation that we're facing. And these young individuals we mentioned, that they were facing all of these tribulations, whether it be trials, tribulations, even temptations of young individuals. That is also a trial for young people, that we find that temptations that they're surrounded by. And strange is the Quran that many times it focuses upon the young individuals and for them to keep their deen, to be steadfast and to be devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where the prophetic tradition that we find that 7 types of categories of individuals will be under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereby there will be no shade. Amongst those 7 types of individuals will be shabun nasha'a fi ibadatillah or fi ta'atillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A young individual who spent their life at the prime time of their life worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereby there will be no shade. Surah Al-Buruj. If we tafsir this surah that we find is once again speaking about Ashab al-Ukhdud, the people who are thrown into the ditch or the ditches. But there once again we find that the young individual, the story of al-Malik wal-Ghulam, the king and the young boy, that this young boy, he changes a whole nation, changes a whole perception in his focus and devotion, commitment towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a person shouldn't underestimate a person's effort in his life, and especially the young individuals, the trials and tribulations that they face. And continuing these trials, or this theme of trials and tribulations, that we find that one will be tested according to one's faith. يُبْتَلَى الرَّجُلَ عَلَى حَسْبِ دِينِهِ وَعَلَى قَدْرِ دِينِهِ. A man will be tested according to their faith. Various wordings we find in the hadith in the Sunnah of Imam Tirmidhi. A person will be tested according to their faith. فَإِنْ كَانَ فِي دِينِهِ صَلَابَةً. If there's some strong resolution, commitment inside his or her faith, fazida, then it becomes a more testing, more we begin to test this individual. Allah doesn't diminish it. As we find that min ma'ani of fitna, that we find is purification. That the more that you burn gold, the more purified it becomes. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to create this purity, to take away any elements of corruption, to remove it from the individual, to make the individual to become pure in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the same hadith that we find other wordings that we find speaking in the beginning, that was asked the question, who are the ashaddun nas bala'an? Who are the most hardest of people tested in this dunya? Al-Anbiya. The prophets are the most tested individuals in the face of this dunya. Thumma as-salihun, thumma al-amthal. Then the pious individuals, then those who follow suit like those individuals. Various wordings that exist inside this ahadith, in these hadith that we find. But all of them carry the same generic format. That the most tested individuals in the face of this earth will be the Anbiya, will be the prophets. then those who come after them will follow suit like those individuals. That's what Allah mentioned inside Surah Al-Baqarah, some verse 214 or so. أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولَ الرَّسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ. Do you think you're just going to stroll into paradise? Do you think you're going to walk into paradise? That's what many of us Muslims by default, that's what we think inside our lives. We think we're Sha'bullah Mukhtar. We think we're just going to walk into paradise. Because by default we're Muslims, we deserve to have paradise. Read the Sunan of the Quran, Sunan of the Anbiya. أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ. Do you think you're just going to stroll into paradise? وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Has not the parable come to those people that came before you? Afflictions, hardships, difficulties. وَزُلْزِلُوا. The earth began to shake underneath them. The earth began to shake underneath them till eventually even the messenger and those who were with him who believed, they made this proclamation, Mata Nasrullah. When will the victory of Allah come? And Allah responds, Ala inna nasrallahi qareeb. Indeed, the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is close by. It's always there. At times it could be just a blinking of an eye. It alternates inside this dunya. But it's always there for the believing individuals that we find. So these individuals, the messengers are qudwat, they are the examples. It's not just a life of textbook and empty words that we find in this world at the moment. Person can preach all day long. All day long you can preach. It means nothing. The greatest example is the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. The greatest example for you to follow inside your lives is the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Where is this ayah placed inside the Quran? That's why the Quran is unique. Quran is strange. Where Allah places certain ayat, certain verses inside the Quran, He placed it inside subhanahu wa ta'ala, inside Surah Al-Ahzab, the 33rd chapter of the Quran, the Confederates, where one of the largest groups of enemies came against the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And they speak about his seerah, about his life. He didn't say to his people, go you and your people. He joined his people. When they complained of hunger and starvation, and he had a rock wrapped to their body, he lifted up his garment and he showed 2 rocks attached to his stomach. That's the type of leader the Prophet ﷺ was, with his people, striving with his people. That's why he became that qudwa. That's why all of the messengers, they all came qudwat. They became examples, living examples to show people this is how you live a life of God. This is how you live a life of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That you're fragmented from your society. You're divided from your society. They lived amongst the people. That's why inside Surah Al-Furqan, Allah describes the messengers living amongst the people. وَيَأْكُلُونَ الطَّعَامِ وَيَمْشُونَ فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ. They eat with their people. They walk in the marketplaces with their people. They live with their people. They laugh with their people. They weep with them. They cry with them. They enjoy life with them. That's what it means to be a messenger of Allah. And that's why read the Quran. It's crystal clear, the Quran. Read Surah Al-Ahzab, the 33rd chapter of the Quran. Read Surah At-Tawbah, the 9th chapter of the Quran. Read Surah An-Nisa, speaking about ayat about al-munafiqeen, crystal clear. Read Surah Al-Imran, speaking about the ayat, some 40, 50 ayat, speaking about the Battle of Badr. It's all there. It's all there. The Quran is there. The Quran doesn't change. That the Quran doesn't change. That people think that the Quran for the 21st century, it becomes a different Quran, a different perception, a different tafsir, a different ta'wilat. Verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remain there until the end of time when His Quran will be lifted. That's what our problem is. Our conviction of the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't want to read them anymore. We don't want to ponder over them. We don't want to recognize the truth that what Allah is telling us inside the Quran. That's how weak some of our faith has become. وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ حَدِيثًا. Who is more truthful in speech than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Woman most truthful in speech, qila, in speech, in statement, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you believe in the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it should move the individual to make them to ponder and to reflect and see these supplications and the life of these prophets. Ibn Kathir mentions that his tafsir that the most profound individual in a life of sabr and patience was this Prophet Ayyub alayhi salam. The examples are developed from the life and the journey of Ayyub alayhi salam, who's going to be his supplication today, how he implored and called upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The supplication of Ayyub alayhi salam in the 21st surah of the Quran, Surah Al-Anbiya. Surah Al-Anbiya, even look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed this dua. And the whole this surah is speaking about Al-Anbiya. It's speaking about this dhikr. That's why Ibn Taymiyyah called this surah Surah of Dhikr. Because some 7 times inside this surah it speaks about dhikr, about reminder, or benefiting from the reminder. So Anbiya, the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we find. One of the Mufassirin mentions that inside this surah is all examples of prophets. For what person? Tasliyatul Rasul alayhi salam, to strengthen the Prophet alayhi salatu salam. To show him, look at the journey of the messengers that came before you. Ibrahim, Nuh, Lut, Dawood and Sulaiman. Then it begins to speak for one verse, Ismail and Idris and Dhil Kifl. Then it begins to speak after that, speak about Yunus and Zakaria and Isa. And a verse of, that we're going to look at, a verse of Ayyub. And then at the end of the surah, look how remarkable the surah is. Allah concludes by mentioning, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We didn't send you except for the mercy to all of the worlds. The whole this surah is just a journey of the prophets, their trials, their tribulations, their difficulties, their hardships, their supplications and imploring, calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَيُّوبَ إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ. Ayyub who called out to his Lord. Some of Mufassirin mentioned, كان أيوب نبيا من الروم. For amongst the Romans, he was a prophet that he sent to these individuals. And the calamities upon him that we find, that he was a person given so much wealth and property was given to this individual. But slowly, Allah took away his wealth. Allah took away his property, took away his land, took away his health. So many afflictions were placed upon this individual. Even on his own physical body. For sabr, he was patient regarding these calamities that were placed upon Ayyub alayhi salam. Ibn Kathir inside his tafsir, he mentions, because some Mufassirin speak about all types of hardship that are placed upon Ayyub. But as many times we mentioned, use Ibn Kathir as a foundation of understanding tafsir of verses of the Quran. He said so many afflictions upon his jism, upon his jasad, upon his body that we find, that began to suffer from judham. Judham is leprosy. That even his skin began to fray. That's why Imam Suddi mentions, Ibn Kathir narrates, mentioned that you find kana yasqut min badni lahmuhu, that his flesh was dropping from his body. Skin was removed from his body. The only thing remaining were the veins and the bones. For sabara, Ayyub remained patient in his affliction, calamity placed upon him, alayhi salam. A discussion begins to take place amongst ulama tafasir, whether it be 7 years or 30 years, he went through this hardship. And the most strongest view is 18 years. As Ibn Hibban inside his Mustadrak and Shaykh al-Nasir al-Albani authenticates the hadith, they went through 18 years of suffering. 18 years of suffering he went through. And once when his wife complained to him and said to him that, you're a messenger of Allah. Why don't you complain to Allah, ask Allah? He said, how many years have we lived a good life? 70, 80 years of a good life we've lived. So a few years, if Allah tests me, what difference does it make? In the grand scheme of things, a few years of afflictions, and I'm too shy to ask Allah. I'm not going to ask Allah because I've lived a good life. So I'm going to remain in this state, in this condition. I'm not going to complain to Allah about the suffering that I'm going through. I lost all of his wealth and his property and his children and everything. Then he called to Allah, idnada rabbahu. Then he called to Allah. When did he call to Allah? 2 views are given by the ulama tafasir. Why did he call to Allah now? The first view is that his wife was only left with him. Everyone was destroyed. Only his wife. And she would take care of him. And then when he came to such an impoverished state, in such a bad state, no food, no drink, she cut her hair, her forelock. She shaved it off. And then she took off the other side. And then that got Ayyub angry. It got him angry that why did you go and do this action? Because he couldn't bear that now that his wife had to do such an action. That's what Fuqaha mentioned. The most beautiful aspect of a woman is her hair. That's why the hair of a woman is covered. That's why she wears adorns with the hijab. And that got to him. The second reason ulama tafsir that they mentioned, why did he call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that moment in time? Because people began to speak. They said maybe because he disobeyed Allah. He was a bad individual. He carried out this sin. So Allah is punishing him and showing us. So he knew that he never done that inside his life. So that's when he called out to Allah. And it's a lesson for us because many of us had this default position inside our minds that every time a person is suffering, it must be because they're sinful. Many of us carry that default position inside our brains and our mind that the reason the person is suffering is because they're sinful. They must have done some sins inside their life. It's partially true, but it's not always true. It's not always true that a person has to be sinful to go through trials and tribulations like Ayyub alayhi salam. That's when he calls out to Allah to remove this calamity from me because people are speaking this manner about me. Anni masani ad-dur. Imam Zamakhshari Baydawi, that mentions that in tafsir, he doesn't say what the calamity is. He doesn't say, Allah, I've lost my children, I've lost my wealth, I've lost my property, I've lost my land, look at my body, look at my state. He just says, Masani ad-dur. Mas in the Arabic language means just to touch. It's touched me. He doesn't narrate fully to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Abu Bakr Jazari said in tafsir, he begins to discuss, is this a shakwa? Is Ayyub complaining to Allah? Is this a form of complaint to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And he brings 16 aqwal of Imam Qurtubi. So he's not complaining. Because the answer is inside the following ayat where Allah mentions, فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ. It's not shakwa, it's a dua. Because Allah says, فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ. We responded to him. He's not complaining. And even if he was complaining, then complain to whom? Only to Allah. That's why with Yaqub alayhi salam, that's another surah in point. Read Surah Yusuf, the 12th chapter Quran, 111 verses. What does Yaqub say after all these afflictions and trials and tribulations? إِنَّمَا أَشْكُ بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ وَأَعْلَمُ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. I only complain of my grief and my sorrow only to Allah. I don't complain to no man, no individual. I complain it only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn Ashur mentioned Masani bima'na masal khafif. Something light. He's saying that this is something light has come upon me. That's what the word mas means. He's not fully exerting himself about his state, his condition that he's in. Another verse in the Quran, he attributes this to shaitan. He said this affliction is from shaitan who's touched me with this affliction. Once again, just like look at the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. Yusuf doesn't say about his brothers when he comes back to his brothers. He doesn't blame them. He said, النَّزَغَ الشَّيْطَانُ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ إِخْوَتِي. He said, the shaitan called animosity and hatred between me and my brothers. He doesn't take that a moment to look down upon his brothers. That's what you call sunnah of al-anbiya. Manhajul anbiya. Take those lessons from the anbiya. Be overlifting individuals inside your life to look at their qudwat, their examples of how they overlooked and they forgave people inside their lives. وَاذْكُرْ عَبْدُنَا أَيُّوبَ إِذْ نَادَى رَبُّهُ أَنِّي مَسَّنِيَ الشَّيْطَانُ بِنُصْبٍ وَعَذَابٍ. They said, oh Allah, shaitan is the one who's touched me. في بدني, inside my body, caused me this harm. وَعَذَابٍ في مالي وفي ولدي. In my wealth and my property caused me this affliction, this harm inside my life. وَأَنْتَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. He doesn't say, Ya Allah, irhamni. He speaks about a general compassion and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That your rahmah wasiyat kulla shay. Your mercy encompasses everything. Everything your mercy encompasses. Kataba rabbukum ala nafsi rahmah. Allah has written it upon himself to be merciful, to show compassion towards his servants. فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ فَكَشَفْنَا مَا بِهِ مِن دُرٍّ. فَاسْتَجَبْنَا, we responded to Ayyub alayhi salam. And we took away. فَكَشَفْنَا. Ibn Ashur mentions, al-izalatu sari'a. فَكَشَفْنَا means all of a sudden. Slowly we harmed Ayyub. Through his life, those 18 years. But in a split second, فَكَشَفْنَا, we straight away removed this calamity away from Ayyub alayhi salam. أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَا وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. Who's the one who takes away calamities and hardships? Who unveils them? Who takes away hardships inside our lives? إِذَا دَعَا وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. If only you implore upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside our lives. And thus we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sunnah inside the Quran that we find to remove these calamities. And action is necessary. You have to do something to remove calamities and obstacles inside your life. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu in tansurullah yansurkum wa yuthabbit aqdamakum. Victory doesn't come by mere words. It doesn't come by empty slogans. In tansurullah, you aid the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yansurkum, will give you victory. Wa yuthabbit aqdamakum, and make your feet to be firm and steadfast. You have to make the action. Maryam alayhi salam was delivering a child. Allah could have just said to her, easy, just drink from the water, the stream underneath you. But what does he say to her? Shake the tree. Shake the trunk of the tree. Make that effort. And then if you find that the dates to suck it will come down, begin to drop upon you. She had to make that effort. Likewise, Ayyub alayhi salam, Allah says to him, Urkud bi rijlika hadha muqtasalun baridun wa sharab. In this state that you're in, strike your foot. Strike it on the ground. And water gushes out. A pure water, cold water, refreshing water. Bathe yourself inside that water. To heal yourself, to cure yourself. By the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When his wife returns back after her errands and returns back to the house, and she sees this beautiful man there, lying there, or sitting there. She says, where's that man? Where's the old frail man gone, that weak state? Where is he gone? He said, Ana huwa, it's me, Ayyub alayhi salam. And in Bukhari it mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala returned back his body and everything. You find that gold locusts were flying and he began to grab them and put them inside his clothing. And a call was made, said to him, why are you doing this, Ayyub? He said, oh Allah, I want your mercy. I want to keep everything of your mercy. I want to keep it with myself. To show gratitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَآتَيْنَا أَهْلَ وَمِثْلَهُمْ مَعُمْ رَحْمَةً مِنْ عِنْدِنَا وَذِكْرَى لِلْعَابِدِينَ. We gave him likewise what he previously had, and beyond that was given to him. ذِكْرَى لِلْعَابِدِينَ. A reminder for the worshippers. Imam Tabari inside his tafsir, he mentions, if this is what the prophets went through, so why do you think you're scot free? Why do we think we're free, we won't be tested? Dhikra lil abidin, a lesson, a reminder for worshippers. We're nowhere near the level of any of the prophets inside our life or ever will be, or we dream about that. But dhikra lil abidin, a reminder for us worshippers, that's the least, that we're going to have to follow that same path, that methodology inside our lives. And return back his wealth and his children. Ulama Tafasidim begin to mention about his children. Whether the children that passed away, that died, Allah brings them back to life once again for him, or he's given a new progeny, a new batch of children is given to him. But if you go to the view of his original children, because that's a natural love that you find that any father has for his children. Al-malu wal-banun zinatul hayatid dunya. Wealth and property are the beautiful things of this dunya. You know, it's today that we find that people will celebrate what they call these children in need today. For children who are suffering or in hardships. Just go to Great Ormond Street Hospital. See the children there suffering. Any human being who sees a child suffering, it will break their heart. Any human being who sees an innocent child, a child with a disability, with some sickness, with some hardship, it will move them. It will move them. Because that's the nature of a human being. To see an innocent child to be harmed will move things that people move nations. People move nations to stop that. And we speak about humanity. We speak about love for humanity, a love for the world. Some of these videos, you can't watch these videos anymore. Great men crumble in such adversities and hardships. I've never wept so much in my life. And I don't know these children. I don't know that land. I don't know these people. But every night it makes me weep. Every night it makes me weep. What are these people going through? 5,000 innocent children have been killed, have been destroyed, have been harmed. For what purpose? How many more will be killed? How many more will be harmed? Then humanity will rise and then say, now we care. It's too late. For one innocent child to die is enough for us to bleed, for us to weep and to think that what can we do to stop this atrocity that's taking place on a daily basis? Then to become silent, tacit, passive individuals inside our life. Another place in the Quran, Surah As-Safat, where Allah speaks about this surah, about this story as well. Allah mentions something different towards the end of this verse, or mentions وَهَبْنَا لَوْ أَحْلَ وَمِثْلَهُ مَعُمْ رَحْمَةً مِنَّا وَذِكْرًا لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. That is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala we bestowed upon him and returned back his wealth and his children. But here concludes, Allah mentions وَذِكْرًا لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. That is a reminder for people of understanding, people of wisdom, people of intellect, people of rationale and understanding. They see that certain things that, yes, all these hardships that are taking place on the world that we find, they all existed before. It's all something that we can't seem to understand, but those who are wise individuals see that is all from the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dhikra lil abidin, as we mentioned, a reminder for the worshippers. As Imam Qurtubi mentioned, this is tazkiran lil ibad. This is a reminder for those worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that when we go through calamities, or our so-called calamities that we think that we're going through, and we reflect upon those, our calamities in comparison to the calamities of the prophets, or specifically he mentions this calamity of Ayyub alayhi salam, we see that our calamities are of not much value. Rather, the calamity of Ayyub should strengthen our faith and our iman that what this individual went through to make us persevere inside our lives. Inna wajadnahu sabiran, ni'mal abdu innahu awwab. Inna wajadnahu sabiran. Now you can understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. We found him to be a patient individual. That's Ayyub alayhi salam. Ni'mal abdu innahu awwab. Amongst the best of servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One who's repenting back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ayyub alayhi salam. And as we find in conclusion, some verses that speak about calamity and adversities and afflictions upon us that we find, وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُوَ. If Allah strikes you with some calamity inside our lives, none can unveil it or remove it except for Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَمْسَسْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. And if He gives you some goodness, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has control over all affairs. That is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُوَ. If some calamity befalls you, no one can remove it except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِن يُرِدْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَلَا رَادَّ لِفَضْلِهِ. If Allah wants some good for you, no one can stop that goodness. No one can turn it back. It is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يُصِيبُ بِمَنْ يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ وَهُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. He gives it to whomever He wants of His servants. Sometimes hardships, sometimes goodness that we find. It is all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is what we need to understand inside our lives. And that's some of the fawaid, the benefits of this dua of Yunus alayhi salam or Ayyub alayhi salam that we find. That test for a person will be relevant to one's faith. They'll be relevant to one's faith. The test that we all face on a daily life, that we think there's such great challenges that we think that we're facing, is only a symbolic gesture of our faith. That's what in all honesty it is, just a symbolic gesture of what our faith is. That's why our tests are at that minimal level that we think that is so great inside our lives. The second lesson, as we mentioned, that not all tribulations and trials are because of people's sins that they carry out. As we mentioned that cliche, we need to remove that from our minds. That because people sin, yes, there is an element of truth in that. There's certain moments and locations that will be punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of their sins and their disobedience. But also likewise, there's going to be moments whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can just decide to test the people, to test the nation, to test their resilience and test their faith. Third, we find that we think our tests are so tremendous. We think our tests are so tremendous that we're facing. That's why I just look at this every single day. And you find that our life is something trivial. Fourthly, that we find not to be ungrateful. Ingratitude in the words that we find is that Ayyub's wife made this complaint to him that why don't you complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's a form of ingratitude which he rebutted. He didn't want to discuss that because he wanted to show his gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So us in that condition that we're living at the moment, we should be full of so much immense gratitude. Immense gratitude we should be full of. Have you seen the video of a 2 or 3-year-old girl on a water tanker, putting her lips to the water tanker till a few trickles of water could come into her mouth? A 2-year-old girl, 3-year-old girl with a mouth there, a few drops of water to come into her. This is what we're visualizing, and we're complaining about our lives, about our food and our drink that we enjoy every single day. And likewise, hardships and tribulations, as Ibn Taymiyyah mentions, make one turn back to Allah. All these tribulations, trials and tribulations, make a person become a strong, convicted individual towards the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I don't want to undermine anyone's efforts or question people's intentions on their life or what they're doing inside their lives. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them for what efforts that they've done. But people would just think they're just slogans. Once again, I want to make this disclaimer. I'm not judging these people, but just put it all into context. That our effort that we make of those hours that we do, how much in return are we doing deep down inside our lives? How much are we doing on a daily basis? That's a key element. Don't undermine dua ilallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't undermine it. Imagine if all of us are making that dua, supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after every single prayer, after every moment that we have, every free time that we have. We're calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's something that we've forgotten, the power of calling and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the least that we can do. Find that inside our lives, to reflect upon our own lives. That what deficiency do I have in my life? You know, companions, the deficiencies they looked at was the sunnah actions they looked at. Because they weren't individuals who falter inside their fara'id, inside their obligatory actions. They may have, if you can use such words linguistically, faltered in certain sunnah that they became relaxed about them. We are not even vigilant on our fara'id, our vigilant actions we need to do of praying 5 times a day. Praying 5 times and being vigilant about that. This should be a source of giving us that strength that Allah be negligent inside my life. I need to now turn back to Allah, rectify my affairs, but have that shame that what does the Quran teach you about your dignity, about your honor, about your dress, about your beauty, about who you are, what your role is. Resort back to the Quran, what it tells you how to adorn yourself, how to conduct yourself. And that's why when it's one of the Spanish leaders, when he began to complain about his loss, complain about the loss of all that empire, the Spanish empire being taken away, dismantled. His mother said to him, "Why do you weep like a woman today?" His mother said, "Why do you weep like a woman today? That when you was a man, you never defended it like a man. So there's no point weeping like a woman today. It's a role of men to stand up inside society. It's a role of men to defend society. الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض. Men have been designed to protect society. It's their role to protect society. Not for women to come out inside society and to chant and to show that. It's a shame upon us. It's a shame upon us that they have that zeal and passion to go out and do that inside their lives. Not to judge them, as we mentioned, we should look back and assess our own selves. That how are we going to protect our ummah, protect our nation? What are we going to raise in the future? What type of people are we going to raise? People just well involved in frivolities of this dunya, luxuries of dunya. As you mentioned many times, all these things going on. Shame upon them. Shame upon them. That everyone's saying that, they have their own personal whatever decision they want to do inside their life. That is not time to talk anymore, to sit there 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks of destruction. And we still want to talk and to discuss what is right, what is wrong, what should we do, whose interest is going to be, who's right, who's wrong. As I mentioned, that even non-Muslims, their emotions are aroused. And they begin to think inside their life that what is this suffering that's taking place? And we should be at the forefront to try to alleviate this suffering. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take away this suffering that these people are suffering on a daily basis. All the children who become shuhada, inshallah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, martyrs in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah raise them and raise their parents to join them. The hardship we have to face. This boy 22 odd years ago, Muhammad Durra, that we find. Watch the snippets of the video. What happened to this young individual? They're playing cat and mouse with this young individual. I can narrate to you so many different stories about Palestine, not just from today. They began to play cat and mouse with this young boy, shooting the wall, intentionally missing the wall, playing cat and mouse with this young boy and his father. Till eventually they shot who? They never shot the father, they shot the boy. They shoot young boys in the kneecaps. They shoot, snipers shoot them in their kneecaps intentionally. Shoot them in their kneecaps because they know it can't be repaired. On many occasions, they don't use rubber bullets. Where the young youth, when they protest, they use live bullets. Then a bullet goes through a 17-year-old, through his heart, goes out the back. And another boy, they shot him from the back and he went through the back, through his heart. That's what they do. The cowards that they are. Strike people in this manner, destroy people in this manner. Cowards from thousands of miles away or altitudes away to find and bombard a Shifa hospital. Been proven today. And Muslims should wake up and sow inside their lives. Every single thing, just tweet everything inside the world that they face. Their own people have admitted the fact these people are liars upon liars. Life to humanity will kill humanity. So the Quran should be a source of light for all of us. Read the Quran on a daily basis. Read through the Quran to see the crystal clear the nature of this dunya.